Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm going to share something that every single one of us can implement into our business. And it's really powerful. And you can do this without any particular training or skill or even experience. If you're new here, I'm Samantha McMahon, and this is the podcast that's designed for people working in the education space. And you're going to love being here because it's full of action, focused advice, as well as powerful insights from myself and special guests. So, back to this one thing that you can implement right now that's going to change things. Well, I have to start with a quick story. So, when I was in my 20s, I was working corporately in the business training world, and I got my first leadership position. Even now, when I think back to it, I can still feel the nerves creeping in because honestly, I didn't have enough experience. I didn't have the maturity. I hadn't been to any leadership training. I'd never been taught. And yet there I was thrown into this position, leading people who were older than me and in many cases more experienced. Now, in my 20s, I had that wonderful mix of naive confidence and sheer enthusiasm, which probably carried me further than it should have. If I was given the same position today with hindsight, I probably would hesitate much more. But even back then, there must have been a part of me that recognized I couldn't just stroll into that role and wing it. So, in the absence of learning and training, I came up with my own compass, so to speak. I thought, what if I just think about all the things I have loved about people I've worked for? I reflected on what I admired, how they made me feel, and why those behaviors really stuck with me. And just as importantly, I thought about the things I didn't love, the moments that frustrated me or made me feel undervalued. And I promised myself not to repeat those patterns. And you know what? It worked. Not perfectly, of course. I made plenty of mistakes. I stumbled through challenges. But that approach gave me a foundation. It filled me with confidence, not unfounded confidence, but the kind that came from learning in real time, from being observant, and from letting experience be my greatest teacher. What's interesting is that way of thinking, the thing that I stumbled across back then, has never really left me. It's become my default way now that I operate in my business. And it's not because I lack confidence in what I do, but because I know there's always something more to learn. There's always someone doing something differently that might spark a new idea. So, I want to share that with you today and show you how this little practice, this idea of reflecting on what you love and don't love around you, can help you in your own business. Done well, it can help you work with more people, spread your impact further, make more money, and crucially, create more space in your life so that your business doesn't take over. So, when I sat down to unpack how I use this process now, I realized it's so ingrained that I almost don't notice it anymore. So, instead, I've outlined some really practical examples. And the first one is related to marketing and selling. I'm always absorbing my experiences as a consumer. For instance, there are a couple of people I really admire in business. I like them as people, I respect their work. But these days, whenever I see their posts, I scroll straight past. And the reason is because every single thing they're putting out there right now is selling. Not only that, but they're often selling different things at once. And the result is I feel confused about what they actually do. And honestly, I feel tired. I feel bombarded. And that's not the energy I want to bring to my own audience. So I use that as a lesson. I still sell, of course. We all need to, but I sell in phases and then I'll just stop. Outside of that sales window, I go back to connection, relationship building, sharing insights, having conversations. And it works time and time again. Firstly, because people get clarity. They know exactly what I'm offering and when. And secondly, because the rest of the time, they don't feel like I'm just hammering them with buy from me messages. They get to see me as a person and as a mentor, not just as a sales machine. Now, the second practical use of this is related to creating content. I pay close attention to the kind of content that pulls me in. You know, the kind that makes you pause mid scroll, lean in, and before you know it, you're consuming more and more from that creator. You almost go down a rabbit hole. And when I'm in that situation, I think about what made me stop. Was it the story, the phrasing, the image, the structure, the hook? And I ask myself, how can I create the kind of content that makes people feel that way? Now, it's not the same as copying, but it's about modeling the effect. Because if I, as a consumer, and I'm naturally drawn in, then that's really good feedback for what works. The third thing is about client experiences. Another way I use this is when I think about how people feel inside my programs, like the Tutors Mastermind or my bespoke one to one accelerator. I remember being in memberships or courses myself that felt overwhelming, like I was kind of drowning in content and I didn't really have direction. Now, I love memberships. I love that choice of when to learn and what to learn. But the way it's presented, the way it's designed, the structure makes a huge difference between me feeling clear about my next steps or feeling very overwhelmed. So when I designed my own membership, the Tutors Mastermind or my bespoke accelerator program or my group classes course, regardless of what it is, I always have that lesson at the front of my mind. I try and create structured roadmaps, for instance. I create guides, I give people information, I have reminders. I'm present whenever I can be in there, or however it's structured. I'm present according to the structure so that people always have that direct access and so that people have the opportunity to ask questions and to get guidance. And something I will say on that is that it's always evolving. So as I invest in more business coaching and as I learn about things that I really like that are really effective, I will bring them into my offers. My offers very rarely stand still. I'm not a kind of set it and forget it kind of person. I'm always looking at making improvements. For instance, right now, I have remodeled the way I do my one to ones, and I'm actually paying attention to the Tutors Mastermind and about how I can create more structure in there, how I can help people almost run through things in a particular order if they want a certain outcome. So it's always changing and it's changing based on feedback and my own experience as a learner. Now, the next application of this concept is really interesting, and it's around pricing and positioning. I want you to just take a moment to think back to the last time you bought something where the price didn't quite match the experience. Maybe you invested in a program that felt underdelivered, or you paid for a product that looked amazing in the photos, but felt cheap when you had it in your hands. That mismatch of expectation versus reality, that leaves a mark. For me, I've learned that when I price my offers, I want the value to feel not just equal to the investment, but greater. I want people to feel like, wow, I would have happily paid more for this. And that feeling comes from being a consumer and noticing when I have felt disappointed. And instead of brushing it off, I just take it as a lesson. How do I make sure that nobody feels that way when they work with me? And a principle that I often follow is to underpromise and to overdeliver. And I've learned that again from being a consumer where other people have done that. Now, the fifth area is around boundaries and client relationships. I've worked with people before where I felt like we were always on call, replying at all hours, available on every channel, never really switching off. And at first, as a client, that can feel amazing. But over time, it can make you feel uncomfortable because you kind of worry that you're overstepping and you worry that they're running on empty. And is that going to impact the way they support you? So, in my own business, I've set up really clear communication boundaries. They're not rigid or unfriendly, but they're healthy and sustainable. And interestingly, my clients always respect it. They know where they stand, they feel reassured by the clarity, and that protects the quality of my work. It protects my energy. And that insight didn't come from business books or productivity gurus, but noticing how I feel as a client. I don't want my clients to wonder whether it's okay to contact me or not, to worry about whether they're overstepping. So I see my role as making the boundaries really clear so that they don't feel that hesitation. Now, this is one that you can all relate to. My next one is about delivery style. Think about teaching, tutoring, mentoring. We've all been in rooms where someone just talks at us for an hour. There are no breaks, there's no interaction, there's no sense that they've even really looked up, taken a breath to see if we're following along. And that drains the life out of people. So when I design workshops or I run sessions in the mastermind, I remember those feelings and I deliberately build in pauses. I try and build in interaction and opportunities to connect. If the kind of topic has meant that I have talked for a long time, I will build in time for questions and answers. Either way, I try and keep momentum going in a way that's pacey, but also in a way that helps people participate. And yes, part of that was learned from training to be a trainer, training to be a teacher, but it's learned most, I would say, from being a delegate, from being in a room where someone is presenting to me and taking note of what I really enjoyed. And actually, I've learned this in more areas of my life. So, as a singer, when I first started performing, in between songs, when there was that silence, I really felt under pressure because a lot of the performers around me, they would make jokes and they would have banter with the audience. And I was that person who, in between songs, my mind went blank. If someone said, tell a joke, that's it. I can't think of a single joke. And I really felt nervous and uncomfortable. And then I remember going to see this amazing band called All Fired Up. They're an Earth, Wind and Fire tribute band. And if you watch Strictly Come Dancing, it's made from the band from that TV show. And I remember going to watch them and I loved it. I loved the performance. And by the end of the night, I thought, everyone was completely drawn to the singer, to the band. Everyone was paying attention. They were enjoying themselves. I was captivated. But the singer didn't make a single joke. He barely had any banter with the audience. What did he do? And I actually watched them a couple of times and I noticed that all he did was he really enjoyed himself. That's it. He just enjoyed himself and we mirrored that. And I just thought, well, I can do that. I can enjoy myself. I do enjoy myself when I'm with my band. And it transformed how I performed and how I showed up and how confident I felt. So, mirroring what other people do or learning from their experiences is so powerful when you're in a situation where you don't feel comfortable. Or if you're in a situation you do feel comfortable in, so like, say, for example, you're a very experienced teacher and you are teaching, it's a really good way to shake things up because there is always room for improvement. There's always room for more engagement, for example. So that's something I have found really, really useful in how I deliver my sessions, regardless of the context. And I vary it. It's always changing because I'm always learning from the people around me. And I find that really exciting. It's really nice not to stand still and to always be learning and changing and evolving. I think when you have that entrepreneurial spirit as well, you're always looking for something a little bit new. And this is a really healthy way of trying new things without getting distracted. All right, now on to my last one, which is about systems and processes. And I know this does not sound very exciting, but systems make a huge difference. Think about when you have signed up for something and the onboarding process was really clunky. Maybe you didn't know what the next step was, or you didn't receive confirmation, or your login details, or the instructions were vague. Immediately, and I've been in this situation, you feel uncertain, even though you just made a positive decision to invest. You suddenly get a little bit of buyer's remorse, like, have I done the right thing? And whenever I experience this, I've always thought when someone works with me, I want it to feel smooth, easy, and reassuring from the first click. And so I've really intentionally built processes that guide people through. And also, I want them to feel excited and motivated. So I bear that in mind even if it's automated, even if, I onboard people through automated emails, I always bear in mind how did they need to feel? And, this does take some investment at times. Like I remember investing in a coach once and they were really responsive. We were messaging each other. Then they sent me their bank details, and I didn't feel totally comfortable with just transferring money. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I know a lot of service providers do that. But as a consumer, I'm used to pressing a button and entering my card details. So it felt a bit weird, but I did it anyway. And that was it. I didn't receive a confirmation. They'd been so responsive before that. I didn't receive any kind of confirmation, any kind of, I don't know, email or anything that told me what my next steps were. As far as I was concerned, I just spent a lot of money and transferred it to someone's bank account. And they said, they admitted, oh, I'm not really that good with tech and all the rest of it. But when you're providing a professional service, I don't think that's an excuse. There are plenty of tutorials out there. There are people who know how to set up the tech. There's help available. And it makes such a huge difference to how your clients feel and what they're expecting from the experience of working with you. The way someone starts working with you sets a tone and it sets a culture. It's not cold, it's not unfriendly, you can still be very personable. But we are all really seasoned consumers. We buy things all the time, Today, you've probably already bought a coffee or a pint of milk or a loaf of bread. We are seasoned consumers and we're trained on what to expect. And we're trained to expect a bit of feedback. When I tap my card on a card machine, I get a beep that gives me confirmation that my payment went through. I get a receipt. We're used to that feedback. And so giving consumers that feedback is so important. And having experienced the opposite, where I have worked with someone where I'm just transferring money to their bank and I'm not getting any confirmation and knowing how that felt, I have never done that. In fact, that's a lie. I did that at the very, very beginning when I started tutoring, but I very quickly changed it actually for admin reasons. I didn't want to have to keep an eye on everything. But when I think about the client experience, I don't want people to feel uncertain. I don't want them to worry, has their payment gone through? I don't want any of that. I want to provide a professional service, and that professional service starts with the client experience. So here's the takeaway I'd love you to remember. Your experience is bigger than just your own business. Everything you consume, every piece of content you notice, every sales pitch that makes you roll your eyes, every great experience that makes you feel lit up, all of that can feed into how you run your business. So try this over the next week. Pay attention as a consumer. Keep a little note on your phone. When something grabs you, jot down why. When something irritates you or makes you switch off, jot down why. And then when you're back into business owner mode, look at that list. Ask yourself, how can I avoid those things that I don't love? And how can I replicate the things that I do in a way that still feels really true to me? It sounds simple, but over time, it builds into a really powerful habit. It sharpens your marketing. It makes your selling more effective. And it ensures that your clients' experiences feel thoughtful and intentional and professional. And just like me in my 20s, you don't need to wait for the perfect training or the perfect circumstances. You can start learning from the world around you right now. So thank you as always for joining me, and you'll hear from me on Wednesday.